Your son was non-compliant with officer commands.
He's autistic, and that wasn't an officer.
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against. The HOA security guard had handcuffs out, reaching for my 10-year-old son's wrists when the real police car pulled up with lights flashing. Sergeant's voice cut through like a whip. Step away from that child. Hands where I can see them. Now. Alex was on the ground in full meltdown, rocking, hands over ears, nonverbal. The guard in his police-style uniform froze mid-Miranda rights, fake badge glinting in the sun. I arrived 30 seconds later and immediately recognized what I was looking at. Felony impersonation of a law enforcement officer. In progress. On my autistic son. Hit subscribe now. If you've ever watched your special needs child terrorized by someone pretending to have authority they don't possess. I'm Daniel Ortega, former police detective, 8 years with Charlotte PD. I know what real arrest authority looks like. I know what badges are supposed to say. And I know exactly what happens to people who impersonate law enforcement officers. This guard, Ryan Mitchell, according to his name tag, had committed at least 3 felonies in the 60 seconds before real police arrived. And Valerie Crawford, the HOA president standing behind him with her clipboard, had created the entire illegal operation. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Alex doesn't speak when he's stressed. Autism spectrum disorder means that raised voices, unexpected confrontations, and authority figures all trigger shutdowns. He'd been riding his bike on the community sidewalk when he dropped a juice box. It rolled into the street. He retrieved it but didn't pick up the container immediately because sensory processing takes some time. That's when Ryan pulled over in his patrol-style vehicle, activated lights like a real cop, and told my son he was under arrest for littering and failure to comply with officer commands. My 10-year-old who goes nonverbal when a stranger speaks too loudly. Now he was on concrete, hands clamped over his ears, making the low humming sound that means he's trying to block out a world that's become too overwhelming. Tears streaming down his face. Unable to tell anyone what happened because the stress had stolen his words. Sergeant Maria Torres, my former partner, had Ryan in handcuffs now. Daniel, this your son? Yeah. I knelt beside Alex, not touching him yet. He needs space during meltdowns. Alex, buddy, I'm here. You're safe. The bad man can't hurt you. He rocked faster, humming louder. Valerie Crawford stepped forward, clipboard raised like a shield. Sergeant, our security personnel have full enforcement authority under HOA governing documents. This child was violating community ordinances, and when he refused to comply with lawful commands. Tell me in the comments section below that where are you watching from? Ma'am, step back. Maria's voice was ice. Your security guard just attempted to arrest a minor without legal authority. That's a felony. We have arrest powers granted by... No. I stood up, putting myself between the board chair and my son. You don't. HOAs have zero law enforcement authority in North Carolina. Your guard isn't a police officer. He has no arrest powers. And I watched him commit felony impersonation. The former compliance officer's confidence flickered, just slightly. Our attorney assured us that the CC&Rs grant... Your CC&Rs can't grant arrest authority. Only the state can do that, and your guard isn't state certified. I looked at Ryan, now in the back of Maria's patrol car. He's also wearing a badge designed to look like a real police badge. That's a separate felony. He's licensed security... Is he? I pulled out my phone. Because North Carolina requires Private Protective Services Board licensing for security guards. Let me check the database. 30 seconds of searching. Ryan Mitchell. Not licensed, not registered, not authorized to operate as security in North Carolina. Pinehurst's enforcer had built an entire fake police force. Unlicensed, illegal, operating for God knows how long, and they'd just used it on my autistic son. Maria took Ryan away in her patrol car. County would handle the charges, impersonating an officer, attempted unlawful detention of a minor, operating without security license. Valerie Crawford stood on the sidewalk watching her security guard disappear in handcuffs, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. This is a misunderstanding, the board chair said. Our security force has been operating for 14 months without incident. We've conducted hundreds of enforcement actions. Hundreds? I stared at her. How many people have you illegally detained? Detained within our authority as, you have no authority. I kept my voice level. Professional. Your security guards have no arrest powers, no detention powers. Every stop, every search, every enforcement action you just admitted to was illegal. Her jaw tightened. Our attorney reviewed the governing documents. We have sovereign authority within community boundaries. No, you don't. There's no such thing as HOA sovereignty. I turned back to Alex. He was still rocking, still humming, but the intensity had decreased. We're done here, but you need to know, I'm reporting this entire operation to the state licensing board and the county prosecutor. For what? Operating an unlicensed security company, impersonating law enforcement, civil rights violations. I looked at her directly. And whatever else I find when I start investigating how many families you've terrorized with your fake cops. The tyrant in heels confidence finally cracked. You can't. I spent 8 years as a detective. I know exactly what I can do. Getting Alex home took 20 minutes. He wouldn't get in the car at first. Too much stimulation, too much fear. I sat on the curb beside him, not talking, just being present until he was ready. When we finally made it inside, he went straight to his room, shut the door. I heard him arranging his toy cars in the precise rows that help him feel in control when the world gets overwhelming. My wife died 3 years ago. Breast cancer. Made me promise I'd always keep Alex safe, always protect him from people who see his autism as defiance instead of disability. I'd failed today. Failed to protect him from a fake cop who saw a nonverbal child and decided that meant non-compliant criminal. I called Dr. Sarah Kim, Alex's therapist, explained what happened. Daniel, this is serious trauma. Her voice was tight. Alex was already making progress with anxiety around authority figures. Now he's been physically threatened by someone in a police-style uniform. This could set him back months. I know. He needs to feel safe again. That means the people who did this need to face consequences. Real consequences. After we hung up, I started making calls. Professional contacts. People who'd know how deep this went. First call, North Carolina Private Protective Services Board. I need to report an unlicensed security operation. Pinehurst Gates Community, Charlotte. Multiple guards operating without state certification. The investigator's tone sharpened. How many guards? I saw one today. The HOA president mentioned hundreds of enforcement actions over 14 months. Implies multiple personnel. We'll open an investigation immediately. Operating without a license is a Class 1 misdemeanor per guard per day of operation. Second call, County Sheriff's Detective Division. Got transferred to Detective James Walsh. Walsh, this is Daniel Ortega, former Charlotte PD. Ortega, heard you left the force. What's up? I explained. The fake arrest attempt. The unlicensed guards. Valerie's claim of hundreds of enforcement actions. Jesus, how long has this been running? 14 months, according to the board chair. Walsh, if they've been conducting stops and searches that whole time, we're looking at systematic Fourth Amendment violations. I'll coordinate with the licensing board. We need to know how many guards, how many incidents, who authorized this operation. Third call, Maria Torres, my former partner. Maria, I need a favor. Can you pull any reports from Pinehurst Gates over the past year? Anything involving their security force? Hang on, I heard typing. Daniel, there's nothing. No reports filed, no complaints logged, nothing. That's impossible. The HOA president said hundreds of enforcement actions. Then either she's lying or they've been operating completely outside official channels, detaining people, conducting searches, acting like police without ever involving actual police. Maria went quiet. That's a police state, inside a gated community. Yeah, and they just tried to arrest my autistic son. Alex appeared in his doorway, still nonverbal, but he looked at me with eyes that asked a question he couldn't speak. Am I safe? Yeah, buddy, I said quietly. You're safe, and I'm making sure that fake cop never touches another kid. But even as I said it, I knew this was bigger than one guard. The clipboard queen had built an entire illegal enforcement regime, and I was about to dismantle it piece by piece. 2 days later, Detective Walsh called me. Ortega, I'm interviewing Ryan Mitchell at the station. Thought you might want to observe. The city police station felt familiar. Same coffee smell, same fluorescent lights, same interrogation rooms I'd used for 8 years. Through the one-way glass, I watched Ryan Mitchell sit at the metal table, hands clasped, shoulders hunched, former military posture gone. Now he looked like someone whose world had just collapsed. Walsh entered the room. I stayed behind the glass, watching body language I'd learned to read during hundreds of interrogations. Mr. Mitchell, you understand you're facing felony charges, impersonating a law enforcement officer, attempted unlawful detention of a minor. Ryan's hands tightened, knuckles white. I was told I had authority. Told by who? Valerie Crawford, the HOA president. She hired me 14 months ago. Said Pinehurst Security Services would handle community policing with full enforcement powers granted by the HOA's governing documents. His voice cracked. She showed me the contract, showed me the authority provisions. I'm former Army MP. I know what legitimate law enforcement looks like. This seemed legitimate. Did you check if you needed state licensing? Ryan's jaw worked, guilt written across his face. She said the HOA was a sovereign entity, that state licensing didn't apply within community boundaries, that we operated under HOA charter authority. And you believe that? I wanted to believe it. He looked at his hands. I got out of the Army 2 years ago, missed the structure, the purpose. When Pinehurst's enforcer offered me a job doing community policing, it felt like I was serving again. Walsh pulled out evidence bags, the fake badge, the handcuffs. Did you know this badge violates North Carolina law? It's designed to look like a real police badge. She gave us those, said they were official Pinehurst security credentials. Ryan's hands started shaking. I should have questioned it. The badge, the uniform, the patrol car with lights. It all looked too real. How many times did you detain residents? I don't know, maybe 50, 60? He met Walsh's eyes, broken. We had quotas, monthly enforcement minimums. Valerie said it kept the community secure. Quotas for what? Violations, littering, skateboarding, wrong paint colors, kids playing too loud. Ryan's voice dropped to a whisper. We were supposed to stop residents, document violations, issue citations. If they didn't comply immediately, we were authorized to detain for processing. Processing where? The HOA office. We had a holding room, kept people there until they paid fines or signed compliance agreements. My stomach dropped. The board chair had built a private jail. Walsh leaned forward. Ryan, there are 2 other guards besides you. Are they licensed? No, none of us are. Valerie said we didn't need licenses because we weren't operating as traditional security. We were HOA enforcement officers, different category. There is no such category in North Carolina law. Ryan put his head in his hands, body language screaming shame, regret. That kid, the autistic kid I tried to arrest, he was terrified, couldn't even speak, and I had handcuffs on him because he dropped a juice box. His shoulders shook. I thought I was enforcing community standards. I thought I had authority. Jesus Christ, what have I been doing? Walsh slid a notepad across the table. I need names. Every resident you detained, every search you conducted, every time you used those handcuffs. If I cooperate, you're still facing charges, but the prosecutor will consider cooperation. Ryan picked up the pen, started writing names, dates, violations, a 14-month catalog of illegal detentions. I watched through the glass, seeing a man realize he'd been the weapon in someone else's authoritarian fantasy. The tyrant in heels had told him he was a police officer, given him a badge and authority he craved, used his military background and need for purpose to build her private enforcement army, and he'd believed every word until real cops showed up and arrested him. I left the police station and drove straight to the HOA office. Needed to confront Valerie Crawford while Ryan's confession was fresh in my mind. The Pinehurst Gates Administrative Building sat at the community entrance, all glass and stone, designed to look official, intimidating, like a government building instead of a homeowners association office. Valerie sat behind her desk when I walked in. No appointment, no warning. Mr. Ortega, the board chair, didn't look up from her computer. If you're here about the incident with your son, my attorney has advised me not to discuss. Your guard just confessed to 60 illegal detentions over 14 months. He's cooperating with county prosecutors. I sat down across from her desk uninvited. You told him he had arrest authority. You gave him a fake police badge. You created quotas for enforcement actions. Her fingers stopped typing. Our security personnel operate under authority granted by... Under nothing. There is no authority. HOAs can't grant law enforcement powers in North Carolina. I pulled out my phone, opened the state licensing database. Ryan Mitchell isn't licensed. Your other 2 guards aren't licensed. Operating unlicensed security is a Class 1 misdemeanor per person per day. They're not security guards. They're HOA enforcement officers. That's not a real position. It doesn't exist in North Carolina law. The former compliance officer finally looked at me. Our governing documents clearly state that the association has enforcement authority for community violations. We have the right to maintain order within our boundaries. Show me. Excuse me? The governing documents, the CC&Rs. Show me where it says you can hire fake cops to detain residents. She pulled a binder from her shelf. Thick, professional, open to a tabbed section labeled Enforcement Provisions. Section 12. The association shall maintain security services with full authority to enforce community standards, conduct investigations, and detain violators pending resolution of infractions. I read it, then read it again. This is your community handbook. Our governing documents. No, your CC&Rs are the governing documents. Those are filed with the county and legally binding. This, I tapped the handbook, is just internal policy. It has no legal force. Pinehurst's enforcer's confidence flickered. Our attorney said, "Your attorney is wrong, or lying. I don't care which." I stood up. Here's what's going to happen. I'm filing a complaint with the North Carolina Private Protective Services Board about your unlicensed security operation. I'm providing evidence to the county prosecutor that you created an illegal detention regime, and I'm contacting every family your guards illegally detained. You're interfering with community security operations. I'm exposing a 14-month civil rights violation. She stood, grabbed a pre-printed form from her desk. Violation notice. Interference with HOA security personnel. Fine, $1,000, payable within 15 days, or we proceed with lien. I looked at the paper. Laughed. Actually laughed. You think you can find me for reporting crimes? You're harassing our staff. Your staff are facing felony charges. Ryan Mitchell admitted to conducting illegal searches, detentions, and impersonation. I pulled out my own phone, started recording. And you just threatened me with fines for cooperating with law enforcement. That's retaliation. That's another crime. The clipboard queen's hand holding the violation notice trembled slightly. Our authority is clearly established in a handbook that has zero legal standing. Want to know how I know? I leaned forward. Because I'm going to the county tomorrow and pulling your actual filed CC&Rs, the legal documents. And I'm betting they say nothing about enforcement authority, detention powers, or fake police forces. You have no right. I have every right. They're public records. I headed for the door. And when I prove your entire security operation has no legal foundation, every person you've detained over 14 months has grounds for a civil rights lawsuit. Get out of my office. Gladly. But here's what you don't understand, Valerie. You didn't just try to arrest my autistic son with a fake cop. You admitted to 60 other illegal detentions. You created a police state in a gated community. And I'm a former detective who knows exactly how to dismantle it. I left her standing there, violation notice still in hand, watching her authority crumble in real time. The tyrant in heels had built her empire on fake badges and residents' ignorance of their rights. I was about to show 280 families what actual law looked like, and it didn't include HOA enforcement officers. The Mecklenburg County Register of Deeds office opened at 8 a.m. I was waiting at the door. I need the recorded CC&Rs for Pinehurst Gates community, I told the clerk. Original filing and any amendments. She pulled up the record system. 2012 original declaration. Let me print that. Amendments. There's one from 2015 for architectural standards. That's it. Nothing from the past 2 years. No amendments filed since 2015. I took the documents to a reading table. 47 pages. Single-spaced legal language. I'd read hundreds of CC&Rs during my detective years. Knew what to look for. Article 3. Board powers and duties. I scanned every word. The Board of Directors shall have authority to A. Enforce architectural standards, B. Maintain common areas, C. Levy assessments, D. Hire contractors for maintenance services. Nothing about security. Nothing about enforcement officers. Nothing about detention authority. I kept reading. Article 5. Violations and remedies. In the event of violation of these restrictions, the association may A. Send written notice to the violating owner. B. Levy fines per the schedule adopted by the board. C. File suit for injunctive relief in court of competent jurisdiction. Send notices. Levy fines. file lawsuits. Zero mention of physical enforcement. Zero mention of security personnel with detention powers. Zero mention of anything resembling the authority Valerie Crawford had claimed. I pulled out the handbook she'd shown me yesterday, found Section 12, the enforcement provisions she'd quoted, compared them side by side. The handbook granted security personnel full authority to enforce community standards, conduct investigations, and detain violators. The actual filed CC&Rs said the association could send violation letters and file lawsuits. Pinehurst's enforcer had written enforcement powers into the handbook that didn't exist in the legal documents. Powers that couldn't exist in the legal documents because HOAs in North Carolina have no authority to detain people. Only courts can do that. I called Detective Walsh. I'm at County Records. The filed CC&Rs contain zero enforcement provisions. Nothing about security personnel. Nothing about detention authority. Valerie made it all up. She just invented law enforcement powers? Worse, she added them to the community handbook without filing proper amendments. North Carolina requires 67% homeowner vote to amend CC&Rs, and amendments must be recorded with the county. I photographed the relevant pages. The handbook provisions have no legal force. They're just words on paper. Walsh was quiet for a moment. So every detention, every search, every enforcement action was based on authority that doesn't legally exist, not just unlicensed security, not just impersonation. The entire foundation is void. That's systematic civil rights violations. State action doctrine applies when a private entity assumes government functions. Exactly. The board chair created a fake police force based on fake legal authority and used it on residents for 14 months. I photographed every page of the CC&Rs, documented the complete absence of enforcement powers, then checked the amendment filing requirements. Amendment to declaration must be approved by 67% of homeowners and recorded with Register of Deeds within 30 days of approval. Valerie's handbook changes, never voted on, never recorded, legally meaningless. The clerk helped me pull HOA board meeting minutes, the ones filed as public record. Searched for any mention of security authority amendments. Nothing. Not one vote. Not one proposal to amend CC&Rs to add enforcement powers. The tyrant in heels had simply written new rules into the handbook and told everyone they were law. I called my attorney friend, Rachel Morrison. Rachel, hypothetically, if an HOA president created enforcement provisions in their handbook without amending the filed CC&Rs and used those fake provisions to justify detaining residents, that's fraud, and every person detained would have grounds for false imprisonment claims. What if she hired unlicensed security and gave them fake police badges? Add civil rights violations under Section 1983. When a private entity acts under color of law, even fake law, constitutional protections apply. Fourth Amendment violations for unlawful searches and seizures. Damages? Significant, especially if victims include children, elderly, or vulnerable populations. And if she knew the authority didn't exist. Rachel paused. Daniel, this isn't theoretical, is it? My autistic son was almost arrested by an unlicensed guard wearing a fake police badge, operating under handbook provisions that have no legal standing. Jesus, how many others? Ryan Mitchell confessed to 60 detentions over 14 months. Rachel's voice went cold and professional. Get me everything. CC&Rs, handbook, detention records, names of victims. I'll file a class action that will financially destroy that HOA board. I left the county office with 47 pages of proof that Valerie Crawford's entire enforcement regime was built on legal fiction. The clipboard queen thought putting rules in a handbook made them law. She was about to learn the difference between policy and legally binding documents, and it was going to cost her everything. That evening, Alex had another nightmare. I heard him crying from his room, the first sounds he'd made since the incident besides humming. I went to his door, found him sitting up in bed, hands over his ears, rocking. Buddy, it's Dad. You're safe. Bad cop. His voice was hoarse from not speaking for 2 days. Bad cop coming. He'd finally found words, and they were about the fake police officer who'd tried to arrest him. I sat on the floor near his bed, not touching. He needed space. The bad cop can't come here. He's arrested. Real police arrested him. More bad cops. Alex rocked harder. Lady said more bad cops. My chest tightened. What lady? Clipboard lady. She said, She said her cops are everywhere, watching, always watching. Valerie Crawford. The board chair had told my terrified autistic son that her security force was always watching him. When did she say that? After bike, after juice box. He hugged his knees. She said I was bad, said cops would get me if I was bad again. The tyrant in heels had threatened a traumatized 10-year-old with her fake police force while I was dealing with actual police. Alex, listen to me. Those aren't real cops. They're fake. They're not allowed to arrest anyone. Not you, not any kid, not anyone. She said she lied, and I'm making sure she can't lie to anyone else. I stayed on the floor, keeping my voice calm, level. Remember how I used to be a detective? How I helped people when bad guys tried to hurt them? He nodded, still rocking, but listening. That's what I'm doing now. Stopping the bad guys who pretended to be cops, making sure they can never scare you or any other kid again. Promise? I promise. After Alex finally fell back asleep, I went to my home office and made a decision. This wasn't just about exposing an unlicensed security operation. This was about dismantling a regime that had terrorized my son and 60 other residents with fake authority. I pulled up the documents from county records, the CC&Rs with no enforcement powers, the handbook with invented authority, the violation notices Valerie had been issuing based on legal fiction. Then, I started building the case the way I'd built hundreds during my detective years. Systematic, thorough, devastating. First, documented the legal technicality. CC&Rs filed with county contained zero enforcement provisions. Handbook amendments never properly adopted. No 67% homeowner vote. No county recording. Enforcement authority doesn't legally exist. Second, identified the victims. Ryan had named 60 people in his confession. I needed to contact them, document their experiences, build a pattern showing systematic rights violations. Third, establish the criminal liability. Unlicensed security operation, Class 1 misdemeanors stacking up by the day, impersonation, felonies for Ryan and the other 2 guards, false imprisonment for every detention, civil rights violations under federal law. Fourth, calculated the civil exposure. Attorney Rachel Morrison had mentioned class action. If 60 families sued for false imprisonment, Fourth Amendment violations, emotional distress, the HOA's insurance wouldn't cover intentional acts. Board members would be personally liable. But money wasn't the point. Justice was. My wife made me promise before she died. Keep Alex safe. Fight for him when the world doesn't understand. I'd failed to protect him from the fake arrest, but I could make sure Pinehurst's enforcer never threatened another child. I called Rachel Morrison. I'm ready. Let's file the class action. Against the HOA and Valerie Crawford personally. She created an illegal enforcement regime based on authority that doesn't exist. She threatened my son after the incident. She's operating a fake police force that has violated the constitutional rights of 60 residents over 14 months. Daniel, personal liability means going after her assets, her home, her savings. She told my traumatized autistic son that her cops would get him if he was bad again. She threatened a 10-year-old who'd just been illegally detained. My voice was steel. I want her personally liable. I want her to understand what happens when you build a police state on legal fiction. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Okay, I'll draft the complaint. But Daniel, this is war. The clipboard queen won't go down without a fight. Good, because I spent 8 years as a detective learning how to dismantle criminal operations. And that's exactly what Pinehurst Security Services is, a criminal operation pretending to be law enforcement. I looked at Alex's door, at my son who'd finally spoken after 2 days, and the words he'd found were, "Bad cop coming." The tyrant in heels thought she could intimidate children with fake badges and invented authority. She was about to learn what happens when you threaten a detective's son. Ryan Mitchell called me 3 days later. His voice was quiet, broken. "Mr. Ortega, can we meet? Outside Pinehurst. Somewhere she can't see us." I met him at a coffee shop 15 miles from the community. He arrived looking like he hadn't slept. Hollow eyes, shoulders hunched, guilt written across every line of his face. "I've been thinking about your son," he said, not meeting my eyes. About how terrified he was, how he couldn't even speak. His hands wrapped around his coffee cup, knuckles white. "I have a nephew, same age, autistic too, and I put handcuffs on a kid just like him because Valerie Crawford told me I had authority. Ryan, Let me finish, please. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket, set it on the table between us like evidence. I've been going through everything, every detention I conducted, every search, every time I put on that fake badge and pretended to be a cop. How many? 63 documented detentions. But there were more, unofficial stops, searches without paperwork, times I pulled people over just to remind them we were watching. His voice cracked. I thought I was serving the community, thought I was preventing crime, but I was terrorizing people. He pushed the flash drive toward me. It's all on here, every detention report I filed with the HOA, photos of the fake badges, training materials Valerie gave us. She literally wrote procedures for conducting arrests and securing suspects. I took the drive. What else? Security camera footage from the HOA office. There's a room, she called it the processing center. We'd detain people there, make them sit in a locked room until they signed compliance agreements or paid fines. Ryan's hands started shaking. It's a jail. She built a private jail in the HOA office. Jesus. The Kim family. You know them? I searched their garage without a warrant. Valerie said we had the right under HOA inspection provisions. Found nothing but stored Christmas decorations. But I wrote it up as failure to maintain tidy premises. He put his head in his hands. The Henderson kid, 17-year-old, I detained him for skateboarding, put him in handcuffs, made him sit in that room for 2 hours until his parents came with a check. Did you realize it was illegal? I wanted to believe it was legal. Valerie showed us the handbook provisions, told us we were HOA enforcement officers with full authority, said it was no different than military police on a base, sovereign territory with its own rules. He finally looked at me, but I knew, deep down, I knew something was wrong when parents looked terrified instead of respectful, when kids started crossing the street to avoid our patrol cars, when families would pull their children inside if they saw us coming. Why are you giving me this now? Because your son finally spoke, and the words he found were bad cop coming. Because I watched the board chair threaten a traumatized kid and tell him we'd get him if he misbehaved. Ryan's jaw tightened. Because I'm former military police. I know what real authority looks like. And I let Pinehurst's enforcer turn me into something that wasn't law enforcement. It was intimidation with a fake badge. He pulled out more documents, handwritten notes. This is everything I remember that's not in the official reports, unofficial detentions, times we threatened people without actually processing them, families who left the community because they couldn't handle the constant surveillance and harassment. How many families left? I counted 12 over 14 months. Good people, families with kids. They sold their homes and moved because living in Pinehurst felt like living in a police state. I looked at the evidence, at the flash drive containing proof of systematic rights violations, at the man who'd been the weapon in Valerie Crawford's authoritarian fantasy and was now trying to make it right. Ryan, this evidence, this could reduce your charges. Cooperation with prosecution. I don't care about my charges. His voice was firm now, resolved. I care about making sure the tyrant in heels never does this to another community, never gives another person a fake badge and tells them they're a cop. She's going to come after you for this. Let her. I'm done being her private police force. He stood up. That kid, Alex, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him the bad cop isn't coming. Not ever again. I spent the next week building the case like I was preparing for trial. Ryan's evidence, county records, victim statements, everything organized with the precision of a detective investigation. First, the licensing violations. I filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina Private Protective Services Board, attached Ryan's confession naming 3 unlicensed guards operating for 14 months, included photos of the fake badges, the patrol vehicles designed to look like police cars, the uniforms with officer patches. The board investigator called me within 2 days. Mr. Ortega, this is the most egregious unlicensed operation we've seen in a decade. 3 guards, 14 months, hundreds of contacts with the public. The penalties stack up to over $200,000 in fines. Can you shut them down? Immediately. We're issuing cease and desist orders today. If they continue operating, it becomes criminal contempt. Second, the criminal charges. I provided everything to Detective Walsh and the county prosecutor, Ryan's evidence of fake arrests, the detention room footage, training materials teaching unlicensed personnel to conduct law enforcement activities. Walsh called after reviewing it. Daniel, this isn't just impersonation anymore. This is conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law. That's federal. Federal? When private entities assume government functions, like policing, they become state actors. Constitutional protections apply. Every search, detention, and seizure violated the Fourth Amendment. He paused. We're referring this to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Civil rights violations. 60-plus victims over 14 months. Third, the legal analysis. I documented exactly why Valerie Crawford had no authority, created a presentation showing filed CC&Rs, no enforcement provisions, handbook amendments, never voted on, never recorded, legally void NC HOA law. Associations can fine and sue, cannot detain or search NC security licensing law. Requires state certification for anyone using physical force Supreme Court precedent. Private entities cannot assume law enforcement powers without state authorization. The board chair had built her entire operation on legal fiction. Fourth, the victim outreach. I started contacting the families Ryan had named. The Kim family, whose garage was illegally searched. The Henderson family, whose teen was handcuffed for skateboarding. The Martinez family, whose child was stopped at an illegal checkpoint. Mrs. Kim answered my call with fear in her voice. Are you with the HOA security? No, I'm a resident. My son was almost arrested by their fake cop. I'm building a case to shut them down. They searched our garage, said it was an HOA inspection, but they weren't looking for violations. They were looking through our personal belongings, boxes, storage bins, like we were criminals. Did they have a warrant? They said they didn't need one, that HOA provisions granted inspection authority. They lied. HOA inspections require notice and are limited to visible violations. They can't search your personal property without your consent or a warrant. I documented her statement. Mrs. Kim, would you be willing to join a class action lawsuit? Silence. Then, if it stops them from doing this to other families? Yes. 7 families agreed to join within 3 days. 12 more said they'd think about it. The pattern was clear. Pinehurst's enforcer had terrorized residents into submission through fake legal authority. Fifth, the financial pressure. I worked with attorney Rachel Morrison on the class action complaint, named defendants, Pinehurst Gates HOA and Valerie Crawford personally. Claims, false imprisonment, civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C. 1983, intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraud. Damages, compensatory for each illegal detention, punitive for knowing violations, attorney's fees. Daniel, if we prove she knew the authority didn't exist, and Ryan's evidence shows she did, we're looking at 7 figures in liability, Rachel said. The HOA's insurance won't cover intentional illegal acts. This falls on the board members personally. How many board members approved the security program? 5. They voted to hire and fund Pinehurst Security Services. All personally liable? Joint and several. Any one of them could be sued for the full amount. Finally, the community education. I drafted a letter to all 280 Pinehurst Gates homeowners. Factual, professional, devastating. Dear residents, you may not be aware that Pinehurst Security Services has been operating without state licenses for 14 months. The enforcement authority claimed by HOA leadership does not exist in the filed CC&Rs and was never properly adopted. Every detention, search, and security action conducted was illegal. I attached proof, the CC&Rs showing no enforcement powers, the licensing board's cease and desist order, Ryan's confession documenting 63 illegal detentions, 280 families about to discover their HOA president had built a police state on fake legal authority. The tyrant in heels thought putting rules in a handbook made them law. I was about to show her the difference between fiction and legal reality, and it was going to destroy everything she'd built. I organized the meeting at a community park outside Pinehurst Gates. Neutral territory, no HOA security watching, no cameras recording who attended. 15 families showed up. Some I recognized from Ryan's detention list. Others were new. People who'd been too afraid to report their experiences until now. The Kim family arrived first. Then the Hendersons with their 17-year-old son, who still flinched when he saw anyone in uniform. The Martinez family. 3 other families whose children had been stopped, questioned, detained. Thank you for coming. I stood at the pavilion table with evidence folders prepared for each family. I know you're afraid. I know the board chair has spent 14 months making you believe her security force has real authority. But I need you to understand something. It was all fake. I distributed the folders. Inside, copies of the filed CC&Rs showing no enforcement powers, the licensing board's cease and desist order, Ryan's confession documenting the illegal operation. Mr. Henderson looked up from his folder. They put my son in handcuffs, locked him in a room at the HOA office for 2 hours. We paid a $300 fine to get him released. That was false imprisonment, a felony, and the fine was extortion. But they said they had authority under HOA bylaws. They lied. Look at page 12 of the CC&Rs. That's the actual legal document filed with the county. It says the HOA can send violation notices and file lawsuits. Nothing about detaining people. Nothing about searching property. Nothing about enforcement officers. Mrs. Kim was crying. They made us feel like criminals, like we'd done something wrong by storing boxes in our own garage. You did nothing wrong. They conducted an illegal search without your consent and without a warrant. Fourth Amendment violation. A woman I didn't recognize spoke up. I'm Sarah Martinez. They stopped my daughter at the community gate 3 months ago, made her show ID, questioned her about where she was going. She was 12 years old, riding her bike to a friend's house. Did they have legal authority to stop her? They said they were conducting security checkpoints, that all residents had to comply. Illegal detention. She had the right to refuse. I pulled out Ryan's evidence. He documented that stop, called it a compliance check, wrote that your daughter was initially resistant to officer commands. Sarah's hands clenched. She was scared. She's 12. A man in a police uniform with a badge was interrogating her. A fake police uniform. A fake badge. An unlicensed security guard pretending to have authority he didn't possess. The families read through the evidence, understanding, spreading like dawn. The fear they'd felt wasn't because they'd done wrong. It was because Pinehurst's enforcer had terrorized them with fake authority. What happens now? Mr. Henderson asked. The state licensing board shut down their security operation. The guards face criminal charges. We're filing a federal class action lawsuit for civil rights violations. I showed them Rachel Morrison's draft complaint. Every family who was illegally detained, searched, or intimidated has grounds to sue. Will we win? Yes, because Ryan Mitchell is cooperating, because the licensing board confirmed the operation was illegal, because I have proof the actual CC&Rs contain no enforcement powers. I met each family's eyes. But more importantly, we'll make sure Valerie Crawford can never do this to another community. A father in the back raised his hand. My family left Pinehurst 6 months ago, sold our house and moved because we couldn't handle the constant surveillance. Can we still join? Yes. You were driven from your home by an illegal security operation. That's damages. By the end of the meeting, 19 families had agreed to join the lawsuit. 7 more said they'd consider it, all of them sharing stories of intimidation, illegal stops, searches without warrants, children terrorized by fake cops. The pattern was overwhelming. The tyrant in heels hadn't just created an unlicensed security force, she'd built a systematic regime of constitutional violations that had driven good families from their homes and made children afraid to ride bikes. One more thing, I said as the meeting ended. There's an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for next week. Valerie called it to address false allegations about the security program. I need all of you there, ready to tell your stories, ready to show 280 homeowners what their board president really built. Mrs. Kim stood up. We'll be there. All of us. The clipboard queen thought she could control the narrative with another meeting. Another clipboard, another claim of authority. She didn't know 19 families were about to stand up together and expose 14 months of illegal operations. Didn't know the state had already shut her down. Didn't know federal prosecutors were reviewing her case for civil rights charges. Her fake police state was about to collapse, and every resident would finally see what real legal authority looked like. The North Carolina Private Protective Services Board moved first. I received the official order via email 3 days before the emergency HOA meeting. Cease and desist order, Pinehurst Security Services, Pinehurst Gates Community, Charlotte, NC. Operating unlicensed security personnel in violation of NC General Statutes, Chapter 74C. Effective immediately, all security operations must cease. Continued operation will result in criminal contempt charges. I forwarded it to every homeowner in Pinehurst Gates. Subject line: Your HOA security force has been shut down by state. My phone started ringing within minutes. Confused residents, angry residents, residents who had no idea their security was unlicensed. Then the county prosecutor's office called. Mr. Ortega, we're filing charges today. Ryan Mitchell, 3 counts felony impersonation of law enforcement officer. The other 2 guards, same charges, plus unlicensed security operation. What about Valerie Crawford? We're still building that case. Conspiracy to deprive civil rights. Operating illegal detention facility. We need the federal review complete before we charge her. How long? U.S. Attorney's Office is fast-tracking it. They see 60-plus Fourth Amendment violations. Pattern of systematic rights deprivation. This could be a landmark case. Next call, Rachel Morrison. Daniel, I'm filing the class action this afternoon. 19 plaintiffs. Claims totaling $3.2 million. Named defendants. Pinehurst Gates HOA and Valerie Crawford personally. Will it hold? Absolutely. State action doctrine is solid. When private entities assume government functions, constitutional protections apply. Every detention was a Fourth Amendment violation. Every search was illegal. The fake badges constitute fraud and intentional infliction of emotional distress. HOA insurance? Won't cover it. Policies exclude intentional illegal acts. This falls on the board members personally, specifically on the board chair who created and authorized the program. That afternoon, Valerie Crawford tried damage control. Sent an email to all homeowners. Urgent. False allegations against community security. The recent state order is based on technicalities and misunderstandings. Our security program operates under legitimate HOA authority granted by governing documents. The emergency meeting will address these malicious attacks on community safety. I replied, all within 5 minutes, attached the actual filed CC&Rs, highlighted the complete absence of enforcement provisions. Residents, compare Ms. Crawford's claims to the legal documents filed with Mecklenburg County. You'll find 0 enforcement authority in our actual CC&Rs. The governing documents she references are handbook provisions that were never voted on and have no legal force. The email thread exploded. Residents comparing documents, discovering the truth, demanding answers. Then Detective Walsh called. Daniel, you need to see this. We executed a search warrant on the HOA office this morning. I met him at Pinehurst Gates Administrative Building. Police tape across the entrance. Evidence technicians photographing everything. Walsh led me inside, showed me the processing center Ryan had described. A windowless room. Lock on the outside. Single chair bolted to the floor. Camera in the corner recording everything. They detain people here? I stared at the makeshift cell. 63 documented cases according to Ryan's records, probably more undocumented. Walsh pointed to the camera. We pulled the footage, hours of residents sitting in this room, some crying, some angry, all believing they had to comply because the board chair said so. This is a private jail. Yeah, built in an HOA office, operating for 14 months. He showed me file cabinets, detention logs, fines collected, compliance agreements signed under duress. Pinehurst's enforcer documented everything. Probably thought it made her operation look legitimate. It's evidence of systematic false imprisonment. Federal prosecutors are going to love this. Tangible proof of a detention facility operated by private citizens claiming law enforcement authority they didn't have. I photographed everything. The locked room, the bolted chair, the camera, the files. That evening, I drafted the final presentation for the emergency meeting. Everything organized, professional, devastating. State cease and desist order. Criminal charges filed against guards. Federal civil rights investigation opened. Class action lawsuit filed. $3.2 million. Actual CC&Rs showing no authority photos of illegal detention room Ryan Mitchell's confession testimony from 19 victim families. The tyrant in heels had called the meeting to defend her operation. To claim authority she'd invented. She didn't know the state had shut her down. Federal prosecutors were building a case, and 19 families were ready to expose what she'd really built. Tomorrow night, 280 residents would see the truth, and Valerie Crawford's fake police state would end. The Pinehurst Gates clubhouse was packed beyond capacity. Over 200 residents crammed into a space designed for 100. People standing against walls, sitting on the floor, overflow crowd in the hallway watching through the doorway. Valerie Crawford sat at the head table with the 4 remaining board members. Clipboard ready, gavel positioned. She looked confident, in control. She had no idea what was coming. This emergency meeting is called to order. The board chair banged her gavel. We're here to address malicious falsehoods being spread about our community security program. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones out. Recording. E-contact with real law. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones out. Recording. A disgruntled resident has filed baseless complaints with state agencies and is attempting to undermine the safety measures that have protected this community for 14 months. Tonight, I'll present the facts. I'd like to present the actual facts. I stood from the back of the room, since I'm the resident who filed the complaints. Valerie's jaw tightened. Mr. Ortega, this meeting has an agenda, which includes addressing my malicious falsehoods. So let's address them. I walked to the front, laptop in hand, connected to the projector. Her PowerPoint disappeared. First slide, the state cease and desist order. The North Carolina Private Protective Services Board shut down Pinehurst Security Services last week. Operating unlicensed security personnel is illegal. Our guards had no state certification, no legal authority, zero. Gasps, confused voices, board members going pale. That's a technicality, the former compliance officer started. It's state law. Here's the actual statute. Next slide, NC General Statutes, Chapter 74C. Anyone performing security functions must be licensed. Our guards weren't. That's a Class 1 misdemeanor per guard per day of operation. 14 months. 3 guards. Over $200,000 in potential fines. Second slide, the CC&R's comparison. Ms. Crawford claims our governing documents grant enforcement authority. Here are the actual CC&Rs filed with Mecklenburg County. I highlighted the relevant sections. 0 enforcement provisions, no detention authority, no search powers. The association can send violation letters and file lawsuits. That's it. Our handbook clearly states, Pinehurst's enforcer tried. Your handbook isn't legally binding. CC&R amendments require 67% homeowner vote and county recording. You never held a vote. Never recorded amendments. The handbook provisions have no legal force. Third slide, photos of the detention room. The crowd went silent, staring at the windowless cell, the bolted chair, the lock on the outside. This is in our HOA office. Our board president built a private jail, detained 63 residents in this room over 14 months, made them sign compliance agreements under duress, collected fines without legal authority. A woman stood up. You locked people in that room? For community safety, Valerie started. For control. I clicked to the next slide. Ryan Mitchell's confession. Your head of security admitted to 63 illegal detentions. He's cooperating with prosecutors, facing felony charges for impersonating a police officer. Mrs. Kim stood from the audience. They searched my garage without permission, went through my personal belongings, made me feel like a criminal in my own home. Mr. Henderson stood. They handcuffed my 17-year-old son, locked him in that room for 2 hours, made us pay $300 to get him released. Sarah Martinez stood. They stopped my 12-year-old daughter at a security checkpoint, interrogated her, scared her so badly she won't ride her bike alone anymore. One by one, families stood, sharing stories, illegal stops, warrantless searches, children terrorized, constitutional rights violated. The tyrant in heels tried to interrupt. These are isolated incidents being blown out of. 19 families have joined a federal class action lawsuit. I displayed Rachel Morrison's filing. $3.2 million in damages, civil rights violations, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Named defendants, Pinehurst Gates HOA and you personally, Ms. Crawford. Board members were standing now. Vice President Tom Chen. I resign, effective immediately. I voted to hire security, but I had no idea. Secretary Linda Park. I resign. I can't risk my home for this. 2 other board members. We resign. Valerie grabbed her gavel desperately. This meeting is not. I move to immediately remove Valerie Crawford as HOA president and from all board positions, a homeowner shouted. Second, all in favor? Nearly unanimous. A forest of hands. Motion carries. The clipboard queen stood there, gavel frozen, watching 14 months of fake authority collapse in minutes. One more thing, I said. Federal prosecutors are reviewing this case for systematic civil rights violations. The U.S. Attorney's Office is considering charges. Valerie's face went white. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Residents demanding answers. Former board members trying to explain. The woman who'd built a police state on legal fiction standing alone at the head table. Her fake cops were gone. Her detention room was evidence. Her authority was void, and 280 families finally knew the truth. 6 weeks later, Alex rode his bike past the community guardhouse. No security patrol car waiting, no fake cops watching, just an empty booth and a gate that stayed open during the day. He pedaled to the playground where other kids were playing, stopped, looked at me. "It's safe," I said. "No bad cops, just kids and parents." He got off his bike, walked slowly to the swings. Other children said hi. Alex didn't respond, still working on social interactions, but he sat on a swing and started moving. My son was playing outside again, without fear, without the terror that had kept him locked in his room for 2 weeks after the fake arrest attempt. Valerie Crawford faced federal charges. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of law, operating an illegal detention facility, fraud. She was looking at prison time if convicted. The former board chair had also been named in the class action, personally liable. Her attorney tried to argue she'd acted in good faith, believing she had authority. Rachel Morrison destroyed that defense with Ryan's evidence, showing Valerie knew the handbook provisions were never properly adopted. Settlement negotiations were ongoing, but the HOA's insurance had denied coverage. Intentional illegal acts aren't covered, which meant the $3.2 million exposure fell on Valerie personally. She'd put her house up for sale last week, leaving Pinehurst Gates quietly, abandoning the empire she'd built on fake legal authority. Ryan Mitchell pleaded guilty to 3 counts of impersonating a law enforcement officer, received 18-month suspended sentence in exchange for full cooperation. He testified at the preliminary hearing, provided all evidence, helped prosecutors understand how the clipboard queen had recruited and misled him. He'd stopped by my house once, asked to apologize to Alex directly. Alex wouldn't come to the door, still couldn't look at Ryan without freezing, but he'd written a note in his careful handwriting. "You scared me, but Dad says you're helping stop bad people now. That's good." Ryan had cried reading it. The other 2 guards faced similar charges. Both pleaded guilty, both cooperating. Pinehurst Gates had new leadership. Emergency elections resulted in a completely new board. First action, terminated all security contracts. Second action, hired a licensed, bonded security company for basic patrols. No enforcement authority, no fake badges, no detention powers. The illegal detention room was dismantled, the locked door removed, the bolted chair gone, turned into a community storage closet. No evidence remaining of the private jail that had operated for 14 months. 19 families were healing, some faster than others. The Henderson's son was in therapy, working through the trauma of being handcuffed and locked in a room. Mrs. Kim still flinched when she saw anyone in uniform, but they were talking about it, processing it, moving forward. And Alex, my son, who'd lost his mother, who struggled with a world that didn't understand autism, who'd been terrorized by a fake cop, he was swinging at a playground. "Dad, watch!" He pumped his legs, going higher. I watched, grateful, relieved, aware that I'd almost lost him to fear and fake authority. The tyrant in heels had built a police state because she thought putting rules in a handbook made them law, thought giving people fake badges made them cops, thought HOA authority superseded constitutional rights. She'd learned otherwise, learned that legal technicalities matter, that standing and authority aren't assumptions, they're grants from the state, that you can't just invent law enforcement powers. Most importantly, she'd learned what happens when you threaten a detective's son with illegal detention. You face the full weight of actual legal authority, real prosecutors, real charges, real consequences. Alex jumped off the swing, ran to me. "Can I play more?" "Yeah, buddy, you can play." If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because constitutional rights aren't optional, and fake authority doesn't survive contact with real law.